In a recent video, I shared a pretty massive shift in my worldview. I talked about how I stopped fighting invasive species and how I started trusting the earth knows what it's doing. Because my shift didn't just come from meditating in a meadow. It came from data. It came from peer-reviewed ecologists, biologists, evolutionary ecologists, and even mycologists documenting what's happening in human-altered ecosystems. And the data tells a very different story than the one we've all been taught. So today I'm sharing this holy trinity of books with you. These books contributed to my deeper found understanding and trust of the earth. So if you want the receipts, the footnotes, the case studies to back up this whole the earth is wise philosophy, these books are going to be for you. First up, The New Wild by Fred Pierce. If you're someone who needs to win a debate against a traditional conservationist, or you just feel heavy with guilt about how ruined nature is, you need to read this. When I first picked it up, I was anticipating to disagree with it. I was waiting to feel validated with my superior understanding, and that didn't happen. I learned that the author is an environmental journalist who has spent many years reporting on projects worldwide. And it's interesting because he started documenting a pattern. He noticed that places that we had previously written off as ecologically ruined were often hosting more biodiversity than pristine areas that we were trying to protect. One of the best features of this book is the 26 pages in the back of footnotes. He brings the receipts. Why read it? Well, he documents this whole myth of the pristine with data. He shows us that what we think of as pristine nature has actually been managed by humans for thousands of years, and it's actually just a glimpse in geological time. To hit freeze frame at any point in geological time and say that this is pristine goes against the beautiful complexity of nature's constant evolution and interconnected systems. You have to read this chapter on Ascension Island in the South Pacific. When Darwin first visited in 1836, it was a barren volcanic wasteland. After years, botanists and the Royal Navy started planting random trees, species that had never met before in evolutionary history. By all traditional ecological logic, that ecosystem should have collapsed. Instead, they formed a fully functional cloud forest within 200 years. It's an artificial ecosystem that collects water and supports life where nothing could survive before, and it does it perfectly. Pierce uses this and many other studies in this book to prove that nature isn't fragile, and she's a master improviser. The New Wild documents how tens of thousands of introduced species from around the world either die out or quickly settle in what the author calls as model eco-citizens. They're out there pollinating crops, rebuilding soil, providing food and habitat. He shows that they rarely ever eliminate native species. Actually, more often, they increase local biodiversity. This book explains that so-called invasive species are passengers and not drivers of ecological change. They always show up where we've already disturbed things. They're responding to the conditions we created: bare soil, altered hydrology, changed fire regimens, fragmented habitats. This book actually opened up the question for me: if these organisms are actively repairing old creek banks, building habitat, rebuilding the soil, then what are we actually accomplishing by spending enormous amounts of research trying to eradicate them? And then that leads me to ask, are we actually preventing the ecosystems from healing themselves? So if you want the history, the case studies, the hard evidence, start here. Book 2, Inheritors of the Earth, How Nature is Thriving in the Age of Extinction. Once you're convinced that nature is resilient, then you're ready for the Christie. Christie Thomas is an evolutionary ecologist at the University of York, and he's asking what's actually happening to biodiversity in the age of the Anthropocene. This book is for anyone who's suffering eco-despair. If you feel like humans are just a virus killing the planet, then this book will flip your world upside down. Thomas argues that we aren't just an extinction event, we're also a genesis event. Why read it? Well, because he documents how human activity is actually accelerating the creation of new species. He introduced you to the winners of the Anthropocene, the creatures that are looking at our cities and our warming climates and saying, I can work with this. His research documents rapid evolutionary adaptation in real time. He talks about how British mosquitoes evolved to live in the London Underground exclusively in under 100 years, becoming reproductively isolated from surface populations. Then he talks about these Italian wall lizards from an island that I can't pronounce, and how they developed entirely new digestive structures, including cecal valves, which they didn't have before in just a matter of a decade or two. This book relays that hybrid plant species are forming in Europe and North America faster than existing plants are going extinct. When species that were geographically separated meet in human-altered landscapes, they sometimes hybridize and create new species. This is speciation driven by human activity. Thomas also talks about the great evergreen switcheroo. So in California, we stress out about how the monarch butterflies are losing their native pine trees for their roosting sites. Well, in the meantime, they've adapted to invasive eucalyptus from Australia, and they seem to be managing just fine on them. He also documents how new species are being born right now, like the Italian sparrow, a hybrid bird that didn't exist until humans created the agricultural land necessary for its two parents to meet. Read this book if you finally want to see humans not as destroyers, but as creative catalysts for the next wave of evolution. And finally, once you have the history and the evolutionary logic, you need the mechanism. How does the Earth pull this off? Merlin Sheldrake's Entangled Life is honestly a spiritual experience disguised as a biology book. Sheldrake is a mycologist, and I have a special place in my heart for mycology. And this book is about how fungi form relationships with each other, with other plants, and with entire ecosystems. I listened to it as an audiobook, and it really was great as an audiobook, so I don't have a handy little prop to hold for this segment. Why read it? Why is this fire so smoky? Read this book if you want to understand the mind of the planet. Sheldrake writes about fungi with the mind of a scientist, but the soul of a philosopher. He breaks down how fungal networks, the wood wide web, stitch everything together. Fungi are completely opportunistic. They'll partner with whoever's there, wherever they can. They don't recognize native versus invasive. They form relationships based on mutual benefit and what conditions are working right now. He also shares research that shows that mycorrhizal fungi will just as readily partner with native or non-native species. If an introduced plant provides the sugars and a native plant needs the nutrients, then the fungal network mediates this exchange. The network doesn't care about provenance, it cares about function. And decomposer fungi don't try to preserve what was, they transform death into conditions for new growth. They're nature's alchemists, breaking down complexity and making those nutrients available for what comes next. Whether they're breaking down a native oak or an introduced eucalyptus, they're doing the same work. liberating the same nutrients. This reveals nature operates through opportunistic partnerships, constant transformation, and response to current conditions. Underground, there's no war between native and invasive species. There's a network facilitating exchanges based on what is functional right now. When we're here chilling above ground, trying to eradicate species based on their origin, the mycorrhizal networks below are already integrating them into new relationships. Nature has moved on, and traditional conservation is the one that's kind of stuck behind on the sidelines. This book teaches us that intelligence isn't just in our minds, it's also in the soil. And it explains how the earth is wise enough to heal itself. Hear the birds? Right there. Snow geese. They're pretty low. So this is your toolkit. If you've been feeling that ache, that sense that the conservation story that we've been told isn't quite cutting it, these books might be your portal. They were mine, because here's what I know in my bones. Nature isn't resistant, she's pristine. She isn't broken, she's adapting. And we're not outside corrupting her. We're in her, we're part of her, we're all part of this great experiment. Sometimes harmful, sometimes generative, but we're always entangled. The question isn't, are we changing nature? We are. Every organism does. The question is, can we change with humility, with attention, with love for what's actually here, and with the humbleness of just trying to understand the complexities as brilliance? Can we learn to become good ancestors of the novel ecosystems that are being born right now? I think we can. And I think it starts by cracking the old story wide open. So if you're ready, if you're curious, I've also listed the 3 books in the description. But I would definitely start with The New Wild. Let it break you open with revealing evidence that nature is constantly adapting. Then let Inheritors of the Earth show you emerging proof that we're evolving at probably the fastest rates ever. And finally, let Entangled Life pull you into the web that explores how everything is connected. Trust me, you won't see nature the same way again. And that's the gift. Disclaimer time. These weren't the exclusive books that changed my perspective on this whole native versus invasive debate, but they were picked to help streamline this scientific and philosophical quandary. If you pick one up, please let me know in the comments below. I want to know which receipt blew your mind the most.